Every single move on the board can change the entire destiny of the game. Today, a friend of mine will explain it to you.
Welcome to this explainer. Now today, we're doing something a little bit different. We are stepping away from the standard analysis of chess openings and tournament records. Instead, we're diving into what is essentially a cinematic, deeply unsettling psychological thriller. It's the story of a brilliant mind that literally ate itself from the inside out. We're going to explore the tragic collapse of Bobby Fischer, but we're framing him not as this triumphant sports hero, but as a prisoner of his own unparalleled genius. So what actually happens when a mind built for absolute order just runs out of moves? To answer that, we have to plunge straight into the freezing, really eerie paradox of 1972 Reykjavik. At this moment, Bobby Fischer is at the absolute peak of his glory, right? He is conquering the world. But here's the terrifying hook. This exact moment of supreme victory was also the precise trigger for his psychological decay. The cost of his absolute genius was, tragically, his sanity.
Let's get right into part 1, the checkmate that broke the mind.
Picture it, the summer of 1972. A 29-year-old Fischer absolutely dismantles the Soviet Union's Boris Spassky. It's the absolute height of the Cold War, and Fischer instantly becomes this global patriotic hero. But here's the thing. Instead of bringing him lasting triumph, winning the world title completely shattered his psyche. By reaching the summit, he removed his one and only anchor to reality. He literally lost his sole purpose for living. On that pristine 64-square board, Fischer possessed absolute control. He could calculate millions of variables. He could foresee every single threat. But in his post-1972 reality, his life just dissolved into a messy, uncontrollable vacuum. He completely withdrew from the public eye. He turned down highly lucrative offers because of this deep-seated, intense fear of being exploited. And he plunged into an obsessive, chaotic isolation.
Which brings us to part 2, the walls closing in and a true descent into madness.
You know that eccentric prodigy we all saw in the 1960s? Well, he began a really rapid, dark descent into severe, untreated mental illness. As he retreated from the chess world, the paranoia that had kind of always lurked at the edges of his personality just began to completely take over his daily existence. What we're looking at is the clinical, step-by-step collapse of a human mind. His lifelong distrust morphed into full-blown delusions. I mean, he was so terrified of a Soviet assassination that it was widely reported he actually had his dental fillings removed. Why? To stop secret agencies from transmitting radio signals directly to his brain. He started believing his food was actively being poisoned. He began hoarding extremist, anti-Semitic literature and retreated into this tiny, squalid basement flat in Los Angeles, even getting mistakenly arrested as a vagrant at one point.
As author Brian Carney observed, winning the World Championship totally validated Fischer's supreme view of himself, sure, but it also permanently insulated him from all the humanizing influences of the real world. Without any peers to ground him, his paranoia was just allowed to flower completely unchecked. He was utterly alone with his demons, descending into a kind of madness that entirely alienated everyone who had ever tried to support him.
Now let's look at part 3, the stateless fugitive.
So after 20 years in hiding, a desperate need for cash pulled the recluse back out of the shadows and directly into the geopolitical crosshairs. The world around him had changed, but Fischer's mind was honestly only growing darker. $5 million. That was the massive prize money that finally lured him back to the board to play a rematch against Boris Spassky. But there was a massive catch here. The match was held in war-torn Yugoslavia, which at the time was under a strict United Nations embargo and heavy U.S. sanctions. By choosing to play for this money, Fischer crossed a very real legal line, and the U.S. government immediately issued a federal warrant for his arrest.
And Fischer's reaction to this? Completely unhinged. Prior to the match, the U.S. government actually sent him a warning letter detailing the serious criminal consequences of playing in Yugoslavia. Fischer's response was to hold a press conference, hold that letter up for the cameras, and literally spit on it. This single, highly public act officially made him a man on the run. He was openly defying superpowers and sinking even deeper into vicious anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, entirely convinced that he was being singled out unfairly.
Let's map this out. In 1992, he defies the sanctions. From 1993 all the way to 1999, he pretty much vanishes into Hungary and Switzerland. By the early 2000s, he's just wandering aimlessly between the Philippines and Japan. The man who was once viewed as the ultimate intellectual weapon of the United States, a guy previously protected by global superpowers, had become a stateless, profoundly paranoid nomad, constantly hiding from extradition.
By 1999, things took an incredibly disturbing turn. His storage unit in Pasadena, which held his historic chess score sheets and personal memorabilia, was auctioned off. In retaliation, Fischer called into a live sports radio broadcast in the Philippines and, bizarrely, terrifyingly, asked Osama bin Laden to attack his storage facility. He would later use these same radio broadcasts to openly praise the 9/11 attacks. It was just the horrific sound of a mind that had become entirely unmoored from reality.
This brings us to Part 4, The Prisoner of Reykjavik, his final refuge.
In July 2004, the fugitive's luck finally ran out. He was detained in a Japanese airport for traveling on a U.S. passport that had actually been secretly revoked. He spent months behind bars fighting deportation back to the United States. But then comes this incredibly eerie geopolitical irony. To save him from the American legal machinery, the Althing, which is Iceland's parliament, stepped in. They passed a special act granting full Icelandic citizenship to the man who had essentially put their country on the map during the Cold War. The Japanese authorities released him, and Fischer was flown right back to Reykjavik. He returned to the exact site of his 1972 glory, but this time he arrived as a bitter, completely reclusive ghost. Dr. Magnus Skulason, a psychiatrist who befriended Fischer in Iceland, made a really fascinating observation. He noted that while Fischer possessed an IQ supposedly higher than Einstein's, psychologically he was trapped in an, quote, infantile emotional world. At his core, he was just a lonely, poor, angry child who used chess to build these aggressive walls around himself. Trust was practically banished from his entire life.
And those impenetrable walls of paranoia, they are ultimately what killed him. This was the final checkmate. Fischer developed a blocked urinary tract and degenerative kidney failure. Now, the tragedy here is that it was treatable, but his lifelong conspiratorial distrust of doctors completely took over. He absolutely refused surgery. He refused a dialysis machine. He genuinely believed the medical establishment was out to get him. And so, he essentially allowed himself to die in absolute isolation.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Part 5, The Ultimate Irony of a Genius Destroyed. When you really step back and look at the profound tragedy of a genius that literally destroyed its host, it hits you with a chilling realization. Fischer was a man who possessed a mind capable of calculating millions of variables simultaneously. He could foresee a grandmaster's attack 20 moves before it even happened, yet this exact same magnificent brain was entirely blind to its own collapse. He could map out every single possibility on the board for sure, but he completely failed to anticipate the destruction of his own sanity in the real world.
64. On January 17, 2008, Bobby Fischer passed away. He was exactly 64 years old. And the profound, almost poetic tragedy of that number really cannot be overstated. There are exactly 64 squares on a chessboard. The very grid that gave him his identity, his immense power, and his sole purpose perfectly matched the length of his life. It was a board that defined him from the very beginning, and ultimately, it was a board that confined him.
So it leaves us with this haunting question. Can absolute mastery of a discipline ever peacefully coexist with a tether to reality? Or, when a mind is pushed to the absolute extreme limits of genius, is the board just destined to become a prison? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. It's a remarkably dark story, but it's one that really forces us to look deeply at the terrifying edge of human brilliance.